there's a disease, if you will, and there's lots of different diseases, but there's a disease that some people have. I would argue most people, but it's on a spectrum of needing to understand what this is, right? What are we supposed to be doing? What's the right way to act? Is it Jesus? Is it Muhammad? Is it Buddha? Is it, whoever? Trying to make sense of all the things you're saying we're trying to make sense of. Is there an essence? Like what exactly is this? Right. And I would say I have that disease. I find myself compelled for whatever reason to try and figure it out. I think Plato had it. I think you have it. I think there's a lot of people that have that disease. The irony, the dark twist of it is like we have that disease because we have these minds that almost can't help but formulate opinions and assessments and judgments. And we're here and we're trying to make sense of it, but we can never understand it. We can never at least as far as we can tell right now, it seems like there's too many variables, there's too many unknowns, and we're just playing this kind of sad guessing game. It's an educated guessing game. We're trying to make sense of it. It's not illogical. It's not that we're not following reason and threads, but because there's always missing pieces, it makes it almost impossible for us. I mean, just take the simple thing we did before with the Socrates is a man, men are mortal. Even as you try and make sense of it and put concrete things in the ground, you start to say, well, what about that word? What exactly does that mean? And what do we mean by that? And I think my working theory right now is that we are in, whether it be God or the universe, random, intentional, we're in kind of this twisted joke where we've been given this ability to think, which then comes with this disease of needing to understand, but we can't understand it. And I say that just to kind of in the spirit of the show, to challenge the value we started with a little bit, to take a very cynical approach to say Western philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, Nietzsche, all of them, Eastern philosophy, it's pointless because I understand why it's happening. I understand why we're looking, but it's never going to lead anywhere. It's just complete waste of time. I'm not saying I agree with that, but I'm sure you've considered that viewpoint. What is the practical response to that says, no, it's not a waste of time?
I think it can help orientate you in a way that illuminates discovery
To what
and
though? Why is
illuminates.
discovery valuable? Because you can make an argument that discovery scratches the itch of that disease. It makes us feel like, oh, I'm understanding, I'm unlocking. But
Yeah,
my
yeah,
view, and I'm
yeah.
not saying it's right, is that if that
No, I'm
discovery
following
isn't
you. Yeah,
leading to
yeah.
something, like, yeah, like, what's the value of it?
Well, I mean, and even comparing what we brought up earlier with Nietzsche to say that there's a natural tendency towards something, and I'm saying, well, there's a natural tendency to be querence, right? To be questioned, like to ask questions. Um, I think that, and then I could compare just the two and say, well, why would mine be different? Well, let me just, I just took ownership of a Western tradition. That's great. You see how I did that? I
Congratulations.
just like, yeah, that's my thing. Or Nietzsche, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that Nietzsche was, you know, I should say like anti-Western tradition, but he's colored it in a different way
Sure.
and pushed back in many places, right?
Sure.
So what is the benefit? Like, how do I know that I'm just not pursuing something that's antithetical to the flourishing of a human, right? Or
Yes.
to the survival of a human? Um, because ultimately, is that it? It's like if you really look at it, we're one species among billions that have kind of been on this planet. And is that the litmus, right? And I'd say, okay, all right, well, yeah, yeah, I could say that. So could we have evolved in such a way where we you know hadn't developed any kind of abstract ability to the level that we have, or when we notice that we see, but you'd have to use mind power, you'd have to use mental power to kind of like temper it, right? Which
Mhm.
is kind of what we do. It's kind of part of the enclosed system. So you could say, well, let's go back before that and say that um, we evolutionary
Oh, that's a
whatever.
word. Yeah.
Yeah, we evolved in such a way that we didn't have quite the level of abstract capability that we have as Homo sapiens. And I'd be like, okay, I can get that, right? Um, I think there's other markers to that if we wanted to try and stay in just evolution. I think I've heard something about um, Neanderthals that they were incredibly expressive with their facial expressions, so that in groups of close proximity, they were highly communicative back and forth, right? With the subtle nuances of their facial expressions. So you might say in tight groups, maybe they're more effective in forming one-on-one bonds.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, beyond our reason, we don't even know the fact that we live in maybe a version of that that doesn't quite have that same natural innate ability to have that like spectrum facial expressions that allow us to have this like tighter like proximity, like proxal versus distal ability to transmit information. And if that is the case, then it just is what it is. It just we we dominated as a species because we had that ability to transfer information over larger distances, right? And then you think, okay, well, that's really interesting because we've now reached the depths of the universe in transmitting information. And so it kind of really unlocked almost like a Promethean godlike entity, right? And through our minds and through our ability to transmit information as a species. And that's pretty damn remarkable and awe-inspiring, right? And so
Yes.
you have to simultaneously look back in history and then forward in history and be an observant and a querent at the same time. Ask questions and observing, ask questions and observing.
Mm, mm.
And the thing is I don't think it's so much about figuring it out, because do we wither and die if there's no more questions? Part of us will. We have to be like, and that's like, well, as long as there's entropy in the universe, there's going to be questions to be asked.
Do you worry at all though that, like, and I'm asking this as much to myself, like the assumptions baked into that, do you ever worry about those? So like, for example, I think, as you said, that ability to reason and transfer knowledge has allowed for, you use the word remarkable, and I think that's exactly the right word, remarkable things, to understand the universe in ways, to pass information around the universe, in effect. The things we've been able to accomplish with this gift of consciousness and reason is I don't know that we can necessarily say it's good in the purest form, because who defines good, right? That gets into a whole discussion of what is the meaning of this, and we don't necessarily know. But if we remove that, just the like absolute value of things we've been able to do is remarkable. Like whether it's good, bad, indifferent, that's for discussion. But that being the point of, like, yes, we can acknowledge that that's remarkable. But is there an assumption in that there's not a cost to it? Like, what is the cost of our ability to do that? And in a very simple term, what is the cost of reason? It brings tremendous benefits, arguably, or at least tremendous activity and progress. But are we sure that the cost of it doesn't outweigh it? The things that come negatively with it, that doesn't outweigh it in some way. And that's what I find myself wondering really often, is like, how do we think about that? How do we think about maybe there are remarkable things about this, but it's not actually net positive. It's not something that actually is good for us, or worth it for us to pursue. Maybe a million years from now, the universe looks back and say, like, consciousness is viewed as like, oh, that was one of the worst flaws of evolution. Like the blip on the radar that is us right now makes it seem like it's the most amazing thing that's ever happened in this universe. But maybe a million years from now, it's looked at as if that was a huge disaster and it ended in a horrible thing, right? Like, so those assumptions that because it's happening, it must be good or it must be positive. Do you worry about those assumptions at all? Are they too baked into our psyche that we almost can't comprehend the idea that the things that we take that must be remarkable, that must be beautiful, maybe they're not as good as we think they are?